Well, I want to change gears a little bit. We've got a few minutes left, and I want to read two quotes from the book that I particularly enjoyed, and tie them into another work of yours. The first, it goes like this: "What is called planning in political rhetoric is the government's suppression of other people's plans by superimposing on them a collective plan created by third parties, armed with the power of government and exempted from paying the cost that these collective plans impose on others." You were talking about urban planning. That's a beautiful, beautiful quote. And then later on in discussing the complaints about CEO pay, you wrote, quote, "Perhaps the most fallacious assumption of all is that third parties with neither experience or expertise can make better decisions on the basis of their emotional reactions than the decisions of those who have both experience and expertise as well as a stake in the results." Now, you devoted an entire book, Knowledge and Decisions, to the challenge of making decisions that draw on knowledge, expertise, and experience that's scattered in the heads of numerous individuals that still gets used somehow without central planning. Tell our listeners a little bit about that book, because it's really a wonderful book.
Well, thank you. I think one of the many fallacies of intellectuals is the assumption that they have more knowledge than other people. There's a certain specialized kind of knowledge, of which that's true.
Yeah, for sure.
But the knowledge that is consequential does not consist just of that kind of knowledge. It consists of all just knowing what a particular location is like can be worth millions of dollars. Big companies like McDonald's is one, A&P during its heyday, and I suspect Walmart today. They pick the location of their stores very carefully and invest a lot of time and money in making their choices. But that's just a very mundane kind of thing, and most people would not think of that as knowledge, but it has tremendous consequences. Many other kinds of knowledge have all kinds of consequences, even though it's not the kind of knowledge that intellectuals specialize in.
Now, that book, Knowledge and Decisions, draws heavily, as you mentioned in the preface, on Hayek.
Yes.
How did you get interested in Hayek? What did you read that got you interested, or which professor?
Well, there was. It's ironic because I first read Milton Friedman's course in price theory, his graduate course in price theory, had as one of his first assignments a little essay by Hayek called "The Use of Knowledge in Society," appeared in the American Economic Review ages ago,
1945.
And the first time I read it, I saw no significance in it. The first time I was forced to think back on it was when I first started teaching, and I was forced to teach a course on the Soviet economy. They assumed that because I had written about Karl Marx, that made me an authority on the Soviet economy, of which I knew nothing.
Ironic, yeah.
But as I now making a huge effort to study this before time to teach the course, I'm struck by all kinds of strange things that happened in the Soviet economy that then immediately caused me to think back to what Hayek had said. And I realized they were trying to run an economy by people who didn't have as much knowledge as the people whose decisions they were superseding. And that this explained a very large percentage of the problems of the Soviet Union. And so from that sort of germ, over the years I began to think about how is knowledge used in society. And so I think of Knowledge and Decision as sort of a 400-page expansion of Hayek's 20-page article.
Yeah. In an earlier podcast with Vernon Smith, I made the same confession that I was assigned that book, not by Milton, but by, I forget who. It was either McCluskey or Herberg. It was probably McCluskey. And I read it, and I didn't think much of it, to be honest. And now I've read it. I think Vernon also he didn't confess he didn't get much out of it, but he did confess that he's read it many, many times since with profit each time. It is a deceptively simple and deep idea.
And it also shows the fallacy of trying to teach students things that they will find relevant. I saw no relevance in that book, in that article when I first read it. It's only after years later and some experience that now suddenly it becomes enormously relevant.
Yeah. Other than Hayek, what are some of the other economists that have influenced your thinking?
Well, George Stigler, I guess, particularly on the history of economic thought. And in fact, I went to Chicago specifically to study under George Stigler. In fact, I went to Columbia the year before to study under George Stickland. When I got there and discovered that he'd gone to Chicago, then I went to Chicago the very next year.
Very interesting. Now, you're not a big fan of those third-party planners in the quote I read. You wrote about them very eloquently in another book, which I want our listeners to be aware of, A Conflict of Visions.
Yes.
What's the conflict of visions?
It's the conflict, ideological conflict, between those who think that the world is one in which you can make all kinds of decisions by third parties, and a world in which you see the enormous difficulty of trying to do any such thing, and the great danger that you'll make things worse when you're trying to make things better.
Any other thoughts on that? Give us some more.
Well, I think that if you believe that the knowledge is concentrated in a handful of people, a relative handful of people, then of course there are all kinds of projects that make sense, up to and including socialism. But if you think that the vast majority of the knowledge is scattered among hundreds of millions of people, then if you transfer decision making from the ordinary person to these elites, you're transferring the knowledge, you're transferring the decision from where there's more knowledge to where there's less knowledge, but more presumption.
Why do you think those utopian visions of the intellectuals are so seductive? Or let me ask it a different way. Why is economics, the lessons that you teach in your books, why are they so difficult for people to absorb? One argument is that, well, economics is just hard. It's a little bit complicated. The way it's taught at the graduate and even undergraduate level today is quite a bit harder, I think, than it needs to be with mathematics. Yes. But you could argue it's just difficult. But I sense in your writing it's more than it's just difficult. It's we don't want to really learn those lessons. Do you think that's true?
Yes. Economists are constantly saying there's no free lunch, but politicians keep getting elected by promising free lunch. I mean, I think Hillary Clinton's ad showing her with health care and things like that under the Christmas tree, so that she's playing essentially the role of Santa Claus. That's what people want. It's easier. It's more satisfying. I think the economic explanations are unsatisfying. I think of FDR when he came in during the Great Depression, and he blamed it on the economic royalists. Well, that may sound quite silly to an economist, but it's more emotionally satisfying. You don't want to find out that the Great Depression had to do with monetary aggregates, tariff policy, and Federal Reserve actions. Whatever. Even if you understood it easily and so forth, it's not very emotionally satisfying. But when you say that someone has done something wrong and that he's going to come in and rescue from those evil people, that's the kind of stuff that sells politically.
Yeah, I think we've done a very bad job as both economists and defenders of liberty and couching our arguments and appealing to the deeper urges that people inevitably have, and I think that's a agenda for the future we could do well to try to improve.
Yes.